Woman slaps royal guard in public. What the guard did next left the entire crowd speechless. The afternoon sun sat low over London, casting long golden shadows across the stone pavements outside Buckingham Palace. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of cool, clear day that pulls people out of their homes and into the streets. Tourists had gathered along the iron railings in their hundreds, clutching cameras and shopping bags, speaking in a wonderful mix of languages that only a city like London can produce. Children pressed their small faces between the railings. Couples posed for photographs. Old men with guidebooks squinted at the famous facade. And right at the center of it all, standing perfectly still beside the sentry box, was Lance Corporal James Whitmore. He was 26 years old, tall, and dressed in the full ceremonial uniform of the Coldstream Guards, the deep red tunic, the polished black boots, and the tall black bearskin hat that made him look even taller than he already was. His eyes were fixed forward. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides, unmoving. To the tourists around him, he looked like part of the building, a decoration, a statue placed there for photographs. But James Whitmore was not a statue. He had spent 6 years in the British Army. He had trained through bitter winters on muddy fields. He had completed 2 overseas tours, carried heavy loads through difficult terrain, and stood long watches in the dark. He was not a man who frightened easily. He was not a man who lost his composure. He had been taught, and had taught himself, that the greatest power a person can carry is the ability to remain calm when everything around them is not. He stood at his post and waited, as he always did, for the 2-hour shift to pass. He did not notice her at first. She had come out of the crowd the way a fish moves upstream, quietly, purposefully, with a specific destination in mind. Her name was Claire Harmon. She was 31 years old, wearing a stylish coat and carrying a large handbag from which she had already removed her mobile phone. The phone was pointed forward, its small red light glowing. She was already recording. Claire had built a following on social media over 3 years. She had over 180,000 people who watched her videos every week. Her content was simple in idea but required nerve in execution. She walked into places where most people felt uncomfortable. She tested boundaries. She challenged authority. She had filmed herself talking back to police officers, crossing restricted areas in public buildings, and disturbing ceremonies she had no business being near. Each time, she had walked away unharmed and uploaded the footage to great applause from her followers, who called her bold and fearless. She had done research on the royal guards. She knew they were under strict instructions. She knew they were trained to remain still. She knew they were not allowed to react to teasing, to shouting, or to people dancing in front of them. She had watched dozens of videos where tourists tried to make the guards laugh or move, and the guards simply stared ahead, unmoved and unreadable. She believed she understood the rules of the game. She was about to discover how wrong she was. Claire crossed the boundary line marked clearly on the pavement. A few tourists nearby noticed and shifted uncomfortably. She walked directly toward James, closing the distance between them in slow, confident steps, her phone held out in front of her. She was close enough now that he could see her face in his peripheral vision, though he did not turn to look at her. She stopped directly in front of him. She said something, no one nearby caught the exact words, and then she raised her right hand. She slapped him. It was not a light tap. It was a firm, open-handed strike across the left side of his face. The sound of it was sharp and clear in the cool October air. A few people nearby gasped. A child turned away. 3 tourists lowered their cameras at the exact same moment, as if they had been given a signal. The crowd went completely silent. Claire was smiling. Her phone was still recording. She had expected him to flinch. She had expected the shock on his face to be the clip she would upload that evening, the mighty royal guard, rattled, embarrassed, staring at her in helpless anger while she grinned into the camera. That was the video she had planned. That was the moment she had come to collect. For exactly 3 seconds, James did not move. Those 3 seconds felt, to everyone watching, like a very long time. Then he turned his head slowly and looked directly at her. What the crowd saw on his face was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was not confusion. It was something far more composed than any of those things. His expression was steady and serious, the way a man looks when he has already decided what he is going to do and is simply doing it. He spoke in a clear, level voice, not shouting, not whispering, but exactly loud enough for every person standing nearby to hear every single word. He said, "Ma'am, you have just committed an assault on a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces. I am placing you under citizen's arrest. Police have been notified. I strongly advise you to remain exactly where you are." Claire blinked. She had not expected that. She had expected him to stay silent, or to call out in frustration, or to look foolish. She had not expected calm authority delivered in a voice as steady as the walls of the palace behind him. She had not expected to be the one standing there, suddenly unsure of what to do next. She tried to laugh. It did not quite work. She glanced at her phone and then back at him, and for a moment she said something that no one was close enough to catch, something that was probably meant to sound confident but did not land that way. Then, from somewhere near the back of the gathered crowd, a single person began to clap. It started slowly, one pair of hands, and then another joined, and then 3 more. And within the space of about 10 seconds the sound had spread all the way along the railing. More than 200 tourists were applauding. Some were laughing, though not unkindly. A few were shaking their heads slowly, the way people do when they have just watched something surprising turn into something satisfying. Claire's smile was completely gone now. She took a step backward. James did not follow her. He did not need to. He stood where he was, straight and calm, and he waited. He had already radioed for assistance with a small device worn on his uniform, a detail that Claire had apparently not accounted for in her research. 2 officers in plain clothes who had been positioned nearby moved quietly through the crowd toward her. She noticed them a moment later, and the color changed slightly in her face. A uniformed police sergeant arrived within 4 minutes. The whole time Claire's phone was still recording. She had not turned it off. What is certain is that the phone captured everything: James's response, the crowd's applause, the arrival of the officers, and finally, Claire herself being quietly and professionally taken aside. There were no dramatic scenes. There was no shouting or struggling. It was all done in the same calm way that James himself had spoken, firmly, clearly, and with complete dignity. She was formally arrested at the scene. 6 other tourists had also been filming when it happened. Their footage appeared online before the evening was over. By midnight, the clips had been viewed nearly 3 million times. By the following morning, that number had climbed past 15 million. By the end of the week, it had crossed 40 million. People watched it not because of the slap, but because of what came after it. They watched it for the 3 seconds of silence. They watched it for the way James turned his head. They watched it for those words, delivered without shaking or rushing or raising his voice. They shared it with friends and typed responses beneath it, not angry responses, but something warmer and more personal. Thousands of people wrote that watching the clip had made them feel something they struggled to put into words. Many settled on the word respect. Claire's channel did not benefit from the attention. She lost 60,000 followers inside the first 24 hours. Several companies that had paid her to promote their products quietly ended their agreements with her. Comments on her older videos, which had once been friendly, turned cold. People went back and watched her previous content through different eyes, and what had once seemed bold now seemed small. She released a statement 2 days later. It was careful, and it contained an apology, though many people who read it felt the apology was more for the consequences than for the action itself. She said she had not intended to cause real harm, that it had been meant as content, that she understood it had gone too far. The court saw things differently. Under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act, Claire was charged with common assault. The evidence was straightforward. The footage, her own footage, showed clearly what had happened. Her own phone had recorded the moment from start to finish, including James's response and the police arrival. There was no question of what had taken place. She was convicted. She was fined £1,400 and given a 2-year conditional discharge. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted that the fact that she had been recording with the intention of publishing the footage made the act considerably more troubling than an impulsive moment of poor judgment. This was not an accident, the judge said. It was planned. James Whitmore did not attend the court proceedings. He was back at his post. He gave no interviews. He made no public appearances. The only words that came from his direction were a brief statement released through the Ministry of Defense, which said simply, "The armed forces are not a spectacle. We serve with dignity, and we expect to be treated with it." That statement was shared more than 2 million times. In the weeks that followed, the story traveled around the world. It was covered by newspapers in Australia, Canada, the United States, Germany, Japan, and dozens of other countries. Television programs discussed it. Podcasts spent entire episodes on it. Universities used it in media studies classes as an example of how content created to go one direction can travel an entirely different path instead. What struck people most was not the legal outcome or the loss of followers or even the fine. What struck people was that single moment, those 3 seconds when everything was still, and the choice James made inside them. He could have reacted in anger. He was human, and no one would have been entirely surprised by that. He could have stayed robotically silent and let the incident pass, choosing to be the statue that Claire had assumed he was. Either of those responses would have been understandable. Instead, he chose a third way. He chose to speak calmly, precisely, and with the full weight of his position behind each word. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He did not lose a single thread of his composure. He simply told the truth about what had happened and made clear what the consequences would be. That is why the crowd clapped. Not because he won an argument. Not because he made someone look foolish. They clapped because in a world that often rewards the loudest voice and the most dramatic reaction, they had just watched a person do the opposite, and it had worked. It had worked beautifully. There is something in that moment worth sitting with for a while. Most people at some point in their lives have been treated unfairly in public. A rude comment in a queue, an unkind remark at work. Something said or done that was designed to make them feel small in front of others. And in those moments, most people either say too much or say nothing at all. Either way, the moment passes and leaves something uncomfortable behind. James Whitmore did neither. He found the exact middle. He said precisely what needed to be said in exactly the right tone, and then he stopped. He did not add to it. He did not take it further. He simply waited for the appropriate people to arrive and do the rest. That kind of control is not something a person is born with. It is built. It is built through practice and repetition, and a great many moments where the easier thing would have been to let go of it. James had spent 6 years in an institution that demanded it of him every single day. He had been trained to stay calm when others were not. He had stood long, cold watches in the rain when he would rather have been somewhere warmer. He had learned, in the way that only real experience teaches, that a steady mind is worth more than a quick reaction. And on that Tuesday afternoon in October, in front of hundreds of strangers and a phone pointed at his face, that training held. A photograph appeared online the evening of the incident. Someone had taken it shortly after the police arrived, after the scene had settled, after Claire had been taken aside, after the crowd had begun to drift away. In the photograph, James is back at his sentry box. He is standing in the same position he had been standing in when Claire first approached. His eyes are forward. His hands are at his sides. His expression gives nothing away. He looks in that photograph, exactly as he had looked before any of it happened. As if nothing had shaken him at all. Because nothing had. That photograph was shared more than any other image connected to the story. People put it in places where they would see it regularly, pinned to notice boards, saved on phones, printed and stuck to walls. They did not share it because it was dramatic. They shared it because it was the opposite of dramatic. It was a man doing his job, exactly as he was supposed to do it, on a day when someone had tried very hard to make that impossible. It turns out that is a powerful thing to witness. There are people who believe that going viral is its own kind of success, that if enough people watch something, that attention becomes a reward worth any cost. Claire Harmon had built her entire career on that belief. She had walked into sensitive spaces and disrupted quiet moments and turned other people's dignity into her content. And for 3 years it had brought her growth and attention and money. Then she met someone who did not play by those rules. Someone who was not interested in the camera or the followers or the reaction. Someone who simply knew who he was and what his job required and stood inside that knowledge like a person stands inside a house during a storm. And the storm passed. In the end, what this story is really about is not a guard or a content creator or even a slap heard across a crowded pavement outside a famous palace. It is about a moment of choice, the tiny, invisible moment that lives between something happening and how you respond to it. Most people rush through that moment without noticing it. A few people have learned to live inside it long enough to choose wisely. James Whitmore lived inside it for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that changed everything for him, for Claire, and for the millions of people around the world who watched and without quite knowing why, felt something they needed to feel. He went back to his post. The palace gates gleamed. The tourists continued to take their photographs. London moved on as London always does. And somewhere across the city, the footage kept playing.